The ammunition tray hit the concrete with a metallic crash that echoed across Quantico's Range 7, brass casings scattering like golden rain across the sun-baked Virginia asphalt. Sarah Matthews, though everyone here knew her as Emma Thompson, knelt among the scattered bullets, her right hand trembling as she tried to collect them. The morning sun caught the blonde curls escaping her regulation ponytail, highlighting the exhaustion etched in pale blue eyes that had seen too much and said too little. Shaky hands training snipers now? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice cut through the humid August air like a blade, drawing snickers from the assembled Marines. His weathered face twisted into a grin that held no warmth. "Maybe start with a water gun, sweetheart." 23 trainees turned to watch the spectacle, phones already recording what they assumed would be another failure from the civilian contractor who'd somehow talked her way into their advanced marksman course. The morning light painted harsh shadows across their faces, each expression a mirror of disdain and amusement. What none of them knew, what none of them could know, was that those trembling fingers had once held steady enough to put a bullet through a target's eye at 1,847 meters. That this nervous woman fumbling with basic equipment was the legendary Ghost Wind, the sniper who had terrorized enemy forces across 3 continents before vanishing into administrative obscurity after Operation Archangel went catastrophically wrong. Sarah's fingers found each brass casing with methodical precision, despite the tremor that ran through her right hand like electricity. A muscle memory deeper than conscious thought guided her movements. The same hands that had once field-stripped an M2010 in complete darkness while under enemy fire now gathered ammunition, with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned that survival often meant appearing weak when you were anything but. "Thompson!" Rodriguez barked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 15 years breaking recruits and building Marines. "On your feet. Time to see what kind of marksman the civilian world sent us." The laughter rippled through the assembled trainees like dominoes falling. Private Jenkins, barely 19 and still carrying baby fat around his cheeks, held up his phone to capture what he assumed would be entertainment. Corporal Hassan whispered something to the man beside him, both grinning as Sarah rose slowly to her feet. But if they'd been watching closely, if any of them had possessed the training to recognize the signs, they might have noticed how Sarah's stance shifted into a perfect shooter's platform without conscious thought, how her breathing automatically regulated into the 4-count inhale, 2-count hold, 4-count exhale pattern that separated professionals from amateurs, how her left hand found the rifle's balance point with the unconscious precision of someone who had performed this motion 10,000 times in conditions far more hostile than a Virginia training range. "Let's see what you've got," Rodriguez continued, his tone dripping with the kind of condescension reserved for civilians who thought they could play soldier. "Simple demonstration shot, 100 meters. Think you can handle that without shooting yourself?" More laughter, more phones. Sarah accepted the M24 rifle with hands that trembled visibly, and she made no effort to hide it. The weapon felt alien in her grasp, not because she wasn't familiar with it, but because her muscle memory screamed for the weight and balance of the custom rifle that now lay buried beneath 6 feet of Afghan soil along with her official identity. "Take your time," Rodriguez added with mock kindness. "We've got all day to watch you embarrass yourself." Sarah approached the firing line with careful steps, each movement calculated to appear uncertain while actually positioning herself for optimal wind compensation and sight alignment. The morning breeze carried the scent of cordite and dust, familiar aromas that triggered memories she'd spent 2 years trying to suppress. In her peripheral vision, she caught sight of a black SUV pulling up to the range's administrative building, unmarked, windows tinted, the kind of vehicle that meant either very good news or very bad news in her experience. She knelt at the firing line, adjusting her position with micro-movements that appeared nervous but actually compensated for the crosswind that none of the watching Marines had even noticed. Her right hand trembled as she gripped the rifle, but her left maintained perfect support, creating a shooting platform that would have impressed a seasoned instructor if anyone had been looking for competence instead of failure. The first shot was deliberate. Sarah allowed her breathing to shift slightly off rhythm, permitted a tiny flinch as she squeezed the trigger, and watched the bullet impact exactly 5 centimeters left of center mass, close enough to prove she wasn't completely hopeless, far enough off to confirm everyone's expectations. The crowd erupted in the kind of laughter that comes when predictions are fulfilled. Rodriguez shook his head with theatrical disappointment, while trainees exchanged knowing looks and updated their social media stories with captions about civilians who thought they could play in the big leagues. Told you, someone muttered. Probably learned to shoot from video games. Sarah chambered another round with movements that appeared fumbling, but actually demonstrated perfect weapon handling discipline. She was aware of the cameras, aware of the mockery, aware of the black SUV's passenger door opening in her peripheral vision. What she wasn't prepared for was the sudden appearance of a figure in navy dress whites, walking toward the range, with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command. Admiral Warren had the kind of presence that made conversations stop mid-sentence and spines straighten involuntarily. At 58, he carried himself with the bearing of a man who'd earned his stars through capability rather than politics, and his pale gray eyes missed nothing. He paused at the range's edge, studying the scene with an expression that gave away nothing of his thoughts. "Who's the new trainee?" Warren asked, his voice carrying easily across the range despite its conversational tone. "Sir, just a civilian contractor," Rodriguez replied, snapping to attention with the automatic response of someone who'd spent his career respecting the chain of command. "Thompson, some kind of administrative specialist who thinks she can learn to shoot." Warren's eyes narrowed slightly as he watched Sarah prepare for her second shot. There was something about her stance, something about the way she held the rifle, that didn't match Rodriguez's assessment. In his experience, civilians who had learned to shoot from books or video games made fundamental errors in grip and posture that were immediately obvious to trained observers. This woman's errors were subtle, almost performed rather than genuine. "No civilian moves like that," Warren said quietly, more to himself than to Rodriguez. Sarah fired her second shot, allowing it to drift 8 centimeters right of center, still within the scoring rings, but confirming everyone's assumption that she was struggling with basic marksmanship. The laughter was louder this time, more confident. Rodriguez actually applauded in a mocking slow clap that drew more phones and more commentary, but Warren continued to watch, his experienced eye catching details that others missed. The way Sarah's breathing pattern remained perfectly controlled, despite the apparent stress. How she cleared a minor rifle jam with movements so smooth they seemed almost automatic. The fact that both of her misses were precisely placed within the scoring zone despite appearing to be the result of poor technique. "Interesting," Warren murmured, pulling out his secure phone to make a call that would set in motion a series of background checks and classified database queries. Sarah was acutely aware of the Admiral's scrutiny as she prepared for what she knew would be her final shot of this particular charade. The morning sun had climbed higher, creating heat shimmer that would affect bullet trajectory in ways that most shooters never learned to compensate for. But before she could fire, a commotion erupted 3 lanes to her left. Private Matthews, no relation, despite the shared surname that had made Sarah's cover identity seem like fate, was struggling with a rifle that had jammed in a way that suggested catastrophic mechanical failure rather than user error. The weapon's action was locked, with a round partially chambered in a configuration that experienced shooters recognized as potentially dangerous. "Step back," Rodriguez shouted, but his command came a fraction of a second too late. Sarah moved without thinking, crossing 3 lanes in less time than it took for most people to process what was happening. She tackled Matthews with precision rather than force, driving him away from the rifle while simultaneously calling out specific technical instructions that no civilian should have known. "Barrels clear, actions locked, extract the bolt manually," she barked, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had dealt with weapon malfunction bounds under hostile fire. "Don't try to cycle it. You'll create a double feed that could blow the chamber." The range fell silent except for the sound of Matthews hitting the ground, harder than necessary, his rifle clattering safely away from him. Sarah's hand tremor had disappeared entirely during the emergency response, her movements displaying the kind of practiced competence that came from years of handling weapons in situations where mistakes meant death. Warren stepped closer, his expression shifting from mild interest to focused attention. "Where'd you learn combat medicine?" he asked, sucked, noting how Sarah was checking Matthews for injuries with the systematic approach of someone with formal medical training. "YouTube," Sarah replied, but the lie came out too quickly, too rehearsed. She realized her mistake immediately and allowed her hand tremor to return, her shoulders to slump back into the posture of someone overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. Rodriguez approached the malfunctioned rifle with appropriate caution, but it was Sarah who identified the specific problem, a manufacturing defect in the bolt assembly that created a dangerous pressure differential during firing. Her explanation was technically accurate and demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond anything a civilian contractor should possess. "Thompson," Warren said quietly, "what's your background again?" "Administrative support, sir," Sarah replied, but her voice carried undertones that suggested layers of meaning beneath the simple words. "File management, mostly, some data analysis. And the medical training, first aid certification, required for most contractor positions." Warren nodded slowly, but his eyes never left Sarah's face. In 35 years of military service, he'd learned to read people with the accuracy of a polygraph machine. Thompson, or whatever her real name was, had secrets that ran deeper than civilian contractor work, and her presence on his training range was beginning to feel less like coincidence and more like deliberate placement. The morning sun climbed higher as the range resumed its normal routine, but the atmosphere had shifted in ways that only the most observant participants could detect. Sarah returned to her firing position with movements that appeared reluctant, but actually positioned her for optimal observation of both the other trainees and the steadily increasing number of official-looking vehicles arriving at the range's administrative complex. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. If that disrespect frustrated you, you're not alone. Hit subscribe because justice is coming, and smash that thanks button to support stories that honor quiet heroes. Ring the bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. Rodriguez resumed his role as chief tormentor with renewed enthusiasm, apparently interpreting Sarah's competent emergency response as beginner's luck rather than evidence of deeper training. "All right, Thompson," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Since you're so good at telling other people how to handle their weapons, let's see if you can actually hit something on purpose." The challenge carried more weight now, with Admiral Warren watching from the sideline, and a small crowd of instructors gathering to observe what they assumed would be either spectacular failure or surprising competence. Sarah accepted the pressure with outward nervousness while internally calculating wind speed, temperature differentials, and the specific ballistic characteristics of the ammunition she'd been provided. 800 meters, Rodriguez continued, pointing toward a target that appeared as little more than a speck at the far end of the range. "Standard combat scenario. Think your YouTube education covered that?" The laughter was more subdued now, tempered by the memory of Sarah's reaction to the weapon malfunction. But the expectation of failure remained strong, fed by hours of watching civilians struggle with tasks that Marines considered routine. Sarah approached the 800-meter challenge with apparent trepidation, taking longer than necessary to adjust her scope and position her body. But those extra moments allowed her to conduct a thorough assessment of conditions that would affect bullet trajectory, wind patterns indicated by grass movement and dust drift, temperature variations visible as heat shimmer, even the slight angle of morning sunlight that could affect visibility and target definition. Her first shot at the extended range went wide by 12 centimeters, drawing renewed laughter and commentary about civilians who couldn't judge distance. But Warren noticed something that the others missed: the precision of Sarah's miss. It wasn't the random error of someone struggling with unfamiliar equipment, but the controlled placement of someone deliberately performing below their capability. "Try again," Rodriguez called out, his tone suggesting that failure was not only expected, but hoped for. "Maybe aim a little to the left this time." Sarah's second shot connected with the target's outer ring, close enough to demonstrate basic competence, but far enough from center mass to maintain her cover as a struggling civilian. The response was mixed, some impressed that she'd managed to hit anything at that distance, others disappointed that the entertainment value of complete failure had been reduced. But it was her third shot that changed everything. A sudden gust of wind kicked up dust across the range, creating conditions that would have challenged even experienced marksmen. Most shooters would have waited for the air to settle, but Sarah compensated for the wind drift, with adjustments so subtle they appeared to be nervous fidgeting. Her shot cut through the swirling dust and impacted dead center of the target, with an audible thwack that carried clearly across the 800 meters of range. The silence that followed was different from the earlier quiet. Not the pause before laughter, but the stillness that comes when assumptions are suddenly challenged. Rodriguez stared through his binoculars at the target, checking and rechecking what his eyes were telling him. Warren moved closer to the firing line, his expression shifting from casual interest to focused evaluation. "Lucky shot," someone muttered, but the words carried no conviction. Sarah lowered the rifle with hands that resumed their trembling, her expression carefully arranged to suggest surprise at her own success. But Warren had been watching her breathing pattern, her stance, her trigger discipline, and nothing about her technique suggested luck. What he'd witnessed was the performance of someone with advanced training deliberately concealing their capabilities. The morning progressed with additional challenges that Sarah met with carefully modulated success, competent enough to avoid complete dismissal, inconsistent enough to maintain her civilian cover. But each demonstration added another piece to the puzzle that Warren was assembling in his mind. The woman known as Emma Thompson possessed skills that didn't match her stated background, reflexes that suggested combat experience, and knowledge that extended far beyond administrative support work. As the training session moved toward its midpoint, a black sedan pulled up to the range's command post, its arrival noted by Warren but apparently ignored by everyone else. The passenger who emerged wore civilian clothes but carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority in environments where authority meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Marcus Ivers had been watching the training exercise from a distance, using high-powered optics to observe Sarah's performance with an intensity that suggested personal interest rather than routine oversight. When he finally approached the firing line, his movements were those of a predator who'd identified prey and was moving in for a closer look. "Interesting demonstration," Ivers said, his voice carrying the kind of casual authority that came from knowing secrets that others could only guess at. He wore his CIA contractor credentials on a lanyard that seemed almost deliberately visible, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who treated human lives as variables in equations too complex for ordinary understanding. Sarah continued her performance of nervous incompetence, but Warren noticed how her entire body went still when Ivers spoke, not the stillness of attention, but the absolute motionlessness of a predator that had detected a threat. "Just trying to learn," Sarah replied, her voice carrying what appeared to be civilian uncertainty, but might have been something else entirely. Ivers smiled with the kind of warmth that never reached his eyes. "Of course you are. Learning can be so educational." The exchange appeared casual to observers, but Warren recognized the undercurrent of tension that suggested these two had history that extended beyond a chance meeting on a Virginia training range. He filed the observation away with the growing collection of inconsistencies that surrounded Emma Thompson's presence in his training program. The sun reached its zenith as the morning session continued, heat building to levels that challenged even experienced shooters. Sweat collected on foreheads and gun barrels, creating additional variables that affected accuracy and required constant compensation. But Sarah's performance remained consistently inconsistent, competent enough to avoid failure, erratic enough to maintain her cover. It was during the afternoon equipment maintenance session that the first major clue emerged. Sarah was cleaning her assigned rifle with movements that appeared methodical but unremarkable when a photograph slipped from her pocket and landed face down on the concrete. The image was partially obscured by shadow and dust, but Warren caught a glimpse of military uniforms and what appeared to be unit insignia before Sarah quickly retrieved it. "Is family photo?" Warren asked, his tone casual but his eyes alert. "Something like that," Sarah replied, but her response came too quickly, and Warren noticed how her fingers gripped the photograph with the kind of protective intensity reserved for objects of significant personal value. The afternoon session progressed with technical challenges that required familiarity with military equipment and procedures. Sarah demonstrated knowledge of weapon systems that extended well beyond basic marksmanship, but she disguised her expertise with hesitation and apparent uncertainty that fooled casual observers while raising additional questions in Warren's mind. Sarah checked the rangefinder device, type special operations snipers use in combat zones. Advanced laser technology enables precise distance calculation beyond human capability. 97% accuracy rate in battlefield conditions. In life or death situations, this military-grade equipment means the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The electronic targeting system that controlled the range's moving targets suffered a catastrophic failure at 2:30 in the afternoon, shutting down the entire facility's advanced training capabilities. The malfunction occurred during a critical demonstration that was being evaluated by visiting officials, creating pressure to restore function as quickly as possible. 10 minutes, announced Master Sergeant Williams, the range's senior technical specialist. If we can't get this system back online in 10 minutes, we scrub the entire afternoon session. Multiple technicians attacked the problem with systematic efficiency, but the electronic failure was complex enough to resist quick solutions. Circuit boards were tested, connections were verified, software was rebooted, but the targeting system remained stubbornly offline. "I might be able to help," Sarah said quietly, her offer almost lost in the general commotion of troubleshooting. Rodriguez turned toward her with an expression of disbelief mixed with amusement. "You think YouTube covered advanced electronic warfare systems?" But Warren was intrigued by Sarah's offer, partly because of the growing accumulation of evidence that she possessed capabilities beyond her claimed expertise, and partly because conventional solutions were proving inadequate to restore system function. "What do you think you can do?" Warren asked. Sarah approached the electronic control panel with apparent hesitation, but her eyes scanned the system's components with the systematic evaluation of someone who understood complex military electronics. Her hands moved across the control interface with increasing confidence, identifying problem areas through diagnostic procedures that required familiarity with classified technical specifications. "The primary power coupling is creating a feedback loop through the secondary processing unit," Sarah explained, her voice gaining authority as she focused on the technical challenge. "If we bypass the internal regulatory system and run power directly through the backup circuits, we can isolate the malfunction and restore basic functionality." The explanation was technically accurate and demonstrated knowledge that definitely wasn't available on YouTube. Williams and the other technicians exchanged glances that suggested professional recognition of expertise, even if they couldn't identify its source. "That could work," Williams admitted, "but you'd need to know the specific bypass procedures for this particular system. These aren't standard commercial electronics." Sarah's response was to begin implementing the repair with movements that showed familiarity with military-grade electronic warfare systems. Her hands moved across components and connections with the confidence of someone who'd performed similar repairs under circumstances where failure meant more than inconvenience. The countdown clock showed 5 minutes remaining when Sarah identified the specific circuit board that had failed. 3 minutes remained when she jury-rigged a bypass using spare components from the range's emergency repair kit. 1 minute remaining when the targeting system hummed back to life with full functionality restored. 0 minutes remaining when Warren realized that Emma Thompson possessed technical knowledge that was classified above his own clearance level. "Interesting skill set for an administrative specialist," Warren observed, his tone carrying undertones that suggested the conversation was far from over. "I used to work with computers," Sarah replied, but the explanation was obviously inadequate for what they had all witnessed. The restored targeting system allowed the afternoon session to continue, but the atmosphere had changed in ways that went beyond technical success. Sarah had demonstrated capabilities that raised questions about her background, her presence on the range, and the real purpose behind her participation in the training program. Something's not adding up with her story, right? Subscribe if you're curious about what she's hiding. We share military stories that reveal the truth behind the surface. Hit the bell so you catch every twist as it unfolds. As the day progressed toward its conclusion, additional challenges revealed additional inconsistencies in Sarah's civilian contractor cover story. She demonstrated familiarity with military communications protocols, tactical terminology that wasn't taught in civilian shooting courses, and situational awareness that suggested training in environments where vigilance meant survival. But it was the arrival of additional observers that created the session's most significant tension. Major Patricia Vance emerged from the administrative building, carrying a tablet computer and wearing the expression of someone who'd discovered information that didn't match expectations. Her approach toward Warren was measured but purposeful, and her presence suggested that background checks had yielded results that required command attention. "Sir," Vance said quietly, "we need to discuss the Thompson situation." Warren nodded, but continued watching Sarah, who was participating in a group exercise that required coordination between multiple shooters. Her performance was competent but unremarkable, except for the way she unconsciously assumed tactical positions that optimized both offensive capability and defensive protection. "What did you find?" Warren asked. "That's the problem, sir. We didn't find anything. Emma Thompson's background check returns exactly what we'd expect for a civilian contractor: employment history, security clearance, recommendation letters, everything perfectly normal and completely unremarkable. And that's suspicious because people with that level of technical knowledge and tactical awareness don't develop those skills in administrative positions. What we're seeing doesn't match what the paperwork says, and that usually means either the paperwork is wrong or the person isn't who they claim to be." Warren absorbed this information while continuing to observe Sarah's performance. The woman was an enigma wrapped in contradictions, demonstrating civilian limitations while displaying military capabilities, showing nervousness while maintaining tactical awareness, appearing weak while responding to emergencies with professional competence. Run a deeper check, Warren ordered. Cross-reference with classified databases. If Thompson has military history that's been scrubbed or redacted, I want to know about it. Already in progress, sir. But if she's a former special operations worker with a classified background, those records might be compartmentalized beyond our access level. Warren nodded grimly. In his experience, civilians didn't develop the kind of skills that Sarah had demonstrated without significant military training. And military training of that caliber usually came with classified operations that left minimal paper trails and maximum operational security. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when the session's final challenge was announced. Rodriguez, apparently still convinced that Sarah's successes were the result of luck rather than skill, designed a test that he believed would definitively prove civilian limitations. Multi-target engagement, he announced, pointing toward a series of targets positioned at varying distances and angles. Combat scenario simulation. You will have 2 minutes to engage 8 targets in a tactical sequence while maintaining communication protocols and ammunition accountability. The challenge was designed for experienced military shooters, requiring not only marksmanship skills, but also tactical thinking, communication discipline, and the ability to perform under time pressure. Rodriguez clearly expected Sarah to fail spectacularly, providing entertainment and confirming his assumptions about civilian capabilities. Sarah approached the challenge with apparent reluctance, but Warren noticed how she automatically conducted a tactical assessment of the target array, identifying engagement sequences that would optimize ammunition efficiency and minimize exposure time. Her movements suggested military training, even when her demeanor projected civilian uncertainty. "Ready?" Rodriguez asked, his finger poised over the timer. Sarah nodded and assumed a shooting position that appeared awkward to casual observers, but actually provided optimal stability and maneuverability for the complex engagement sequence ahead. Her breathing regulated into combat rhythm without conscious thought, and her grip on the rifle shifted into configurations that no civilian shooting course would have taught. The timer started, and Sarah began engaging targets with a precision that made Rodriguez's assumptions evaporate like morning mist. Her shots were placed with surgical accuracy, her movement between positions was tactically sound, and her communication protocols were flawless. She completed the entire engagement sequence in 1 minute and 37 seconds, with 8 hits in 8 different target zones that would have been lethal shots against human opponents. The range fell silent except for the sound of brass casings settling on concrete and the distant hum of electronic equipment. Rodriguez stared at the target display with an expression of complete disbelief, while other observers exchanged glances that suggested their assumptions about Emma Thompson required fundamental revision. Warren approached Sarah with measured steps, his expression carefully neutral despite the storm of questions building in his mind. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Books," Sarah replied, but even she seemed to realize how inadequate the explanation sounded, given what everyone had just witnessed. "What kind of books?" "Military history, tactical manuals. You can find almost anything online these days." Warren nodded slowly, but his eyes never left Sarah's face. In his experience, people didn't develop combat-level shooting skills from reading books, no matter how comprehensive their research might be. What he had witnessed suggested training that came from repetition under stress, the kind of muscle memory that developed only through extensive practice in realistic conditions. The session was officially concluded as the sun touched the horizon, painting the Virginia landscape in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Warren of other ranges in other countries where he'd observed similar demonstrations of marksmanship. But this was the first time he'd seen such skills displayed by someone whose official background suggested they shouldn't possess them. As the participants prepared to leave, Warren noticed Sarah lingering near the equipment storage area, her movements suggesting she was waiting for something or someone. Her tactical awareness remained active despite the apparently casual atmosphere, and Warren recognized the vigilance of someone who'd learned to expect danger even in supposedly safe environments. It was then that Dr. Ivers approached for his second conversation of the day. "Impressive shooting," Ivers said, his tone carrying undertones that suggested the compliment was anything but casual. "Very impressive for someone with your limited experience." Sarah turned toward Ivers with movements that appeared startled, but actually positioned her for optimal response to potential threats. "Thank you," she replied, but her voice carried wariness that hadn't been present in earlier interactions. "Tell me," Ivers continued, moving closer with the confidence of someone who believed he held decisive advantages, "have you ever been to Afghanistan?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, carrying implications that went far beyond casual conversation. Sarah's response was to become very still, not the stillness of someone who didn't understand the question, but the absolute motionlessness of someone who understood it perfectly and was calculating the best response. "No," Sarah said finally, but the single word carried enough hesitation to suggest that the truth might be more complicated. Ivers smiled, with the kind of satisfaction that came from knowing secrets that others could only guess at. "Of course not. I must have confused you with someone else. Someone who looked very much like you but had a different name. Someone who was reported killed in action about 2 years ago." Warren felt the conversation's tension ratchet upward like a weapon being cocked. Whatever was happening between Ivers and Sarah went beyond casual recognition, and the implications suggested classified operations and compartmentalized secrets that could have far-reaching consequences if exposed. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Sarah replied, but her voice had acquired an edge that suggested the civilian contractor facade was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. "Perhaps," Ivers agreed, but his eyes held the cold satisfaction of a predator who'd cornered prey. But confusion can be so easily cleared up with the right documentation. Background checks, fingerprint analysis, dental records. Amazing what technology can reveal about people's true identities. The threat was delivered with casual politeness, but Warren recognized it as a direct challenge to Sarah's cover story. Whatever game was being played between these two had stakes that extended far beyond training range politics, and Warren found himself caught between competing loyalties and incomplete information. Sarah gathered her equipment with movements that appeared routine, but actually positioned her for rapid departure if circumstances required it. Her tactical awareness had shifted into high gear, and Warren could see her mentally cataloging exit routes and potential threats with the systematic approach of someone who'd survived situations where such awareness meant the difference between life and death. "Enjoy your evening," Ivers said as Sarah prepared to leave. "Tomorrow should be very interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what other surprises you might have in store for us." The words were delivered with a smile that never reached his eyes, and Warren recognized the kind of threat that was designed to create maximum psychological pressure while maintaining plausible deniability. Whatever history existed between Ivers and Sarah, it was about to come to a head in ways that could affect everyone involved. As Sarah walked toward the parking area, Warren noticed something that others missed: the way she moved with peripheral vision constantly active, the systematic evaluation of vehicles and personnel that suggested she was conducting counter-surveillance procedures. Her departure appeared routine to casual observers, but Warren recognized the tactical withdrawal of someone who'd identified potential threats and was repositioning for better strategic advantage. The range grew quiet as personnel departed for the day, but Warren remained at his observation position, processing the day's events and their implications. Emma Thompson, or whoever she really was, possessed capabilities that suggested military training at the highest levels. Her presence on his training range wasn't coincidental, and the interest that Dr. Ivers was showing in her suggested classified complications that could affect national security considerations. Warren pulled out his secure phone and placed a call that would initiate background checks at classification levels that required presidential authorization. If Emma Thompson was connected to operations that had been compartmentalized above his clearance level, he needed to know before the situation escalated beyond his ability to control it. As darkness settled over the Virginia landscape, Warren found himself contemplating the possibility that his training range had become the stage for a confrontation between forces that operated in the shadows of national security. The woman known as Emma Thompson was clearly more than she appeared to be, and Dr. Ivers' interest in her suggested that secrets were about to be exposed that some people had gone to great lengths to keep buried. The day's final entry in Warren's official log noted routine training activities with satisfactory performance by all participants. But his personal notes recorded a series of observations and concerns that would require careful attention from intelligence services that specialized in identifying threats to operational security and national defense. The deployment insurance papers beside her fake credentials Coverage every operator maximizes before high-risk missions. Triple death benefits for families, disability, protection for combat injuries. 89% of special forces increase coverage before dangerous assignments. Protecting the future matters as much as surviving today. As Warren prepared to leave the range, he took one final look at the target arrays, where Sarah had demonstrated capabilities that challenged every assumption about her background and training. The precision of her shooting, the tactical soundness of her movement, the professional competence of her technical repairs, all suggested military experience at levels that didn't match her official documentation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities for Sarah to either maintain her civilian cover or reveal additional capabilities that would force a complete reassessment of who she really was and why she'd appeared on his training range. Warren suspected that Dr. Ivers was planning to escalate whatever confrontation was building between them, and the result would either expose or protect secrets that people had died to keep. The Virginia night settled over Quantico with the kind of stillness that preceded significant events, and Warren found himself wondering whether tomorrow would bring answers to the questions that had been building throughout the day, or whether new mysteries would emerge that would complicate an already complex situation beyond anyone's ability to resolve peacefully. In the distance, the lights of the administrative complex created patterns against the darkness that reminded Warren of other facilities in other countries where he'd been involved in operations that never appeared in official records. The woman known as Emma Thompson was connected to that world of shadows and secrets, and tomorrow would determine whether those connections would remain buried or whether they would surface in ways that could affect everyone involved. The day's events had created momentum toward a confrontation that Warren suspected had been building for far longer than anyone realized, and he found himself in the position of trying to maintain control over a situation that involved forces and loyalties that extended far beyond his authority or understanding. Sarah had demonstrated that she was far more than a civilian contractor, and Dr. Ivers had made it clear that he intended to expose whatever secrets she was protecting. Warren locked the range facilities and began the drive back to his quarters, but his mind remained focused on the challenges that tomorrow would bring and the possibility that his training range was about to become the site of a reckoning that had been 2 years in the making. The morning of day 2 arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made promises of heat and tension to come. Sarah arrived at Range 7 45 minutes early, using the extra time to conduct what appeared to be casual equipment checks, but actually constituted a thorough reconnaissance of the facility's layout, personnel patterns, and potential security vulnerabilities. Her movements carried the systematic thoroughness of someone who'd learned that survival often depended on understanding terrain before the shooting started. Admiral Warren was already present, conducting his own evaluation of the day's setup, with the methodical attention of someone who suspected that routine training was about to become something significantly more complex. He had spent the previous evening reviewing classified files that painted an increasingly complicated picture of the woman known as Emma Thompson, and the morning would either confirm or challenge the theories that had kept him awake until 0300 hours. The photograph that had slipped from Sarah's pocket the previous day lay on Warren's desk in the administrative building, enlarged and enhanced by technical specialists who'd identified details that casual observation had missed. The image showed 7 operators in tactical gear, faces partially obscured, but unit insignia clearly visible to trained observers. The timestamp indicated the photo had been taken 3 days before Operation Archangel's catastrophic conclusion, and facial recognition software had identified at least 3 of the operators as personnel who'd been officially declared killed in action. Warren pocketed the enhanced image as he walked toward the range, knowing that the morning's activities would either provide additional context for the growing mystery or force a confrontation that could have consequences extending far beyond his training facility. Dr. Ivers had arrived early as well, his presence carrying the kind of predatory patience that suggested he was preparing to spring whatever trap he'd been constructing since recognizing Sarah the previous day. Sarah's equipment check revealed that her rifle had been tampered with overnight, subtle modifications that would have been undetectable to casual inspection, but created malfunctions that could prove embarrassing or dangerous during precision shooting. The sabotage was professional quality, suggesting that whoever had performed it possessed both access to secure facilities and knowledge of advanced weapons systems. Sarah made mental note of the modifications while appearing to conduct routine maintenance, her actions creating the impression of civilian diligence while actually implementing countermeasures that would neutralize the sabotage without revealing her awareness of it. "Morning, Thompson," Rodriguez called out as other participants arrived for the day's session. His tone carried the kind of confidence that came from believing the previous day's surprises had been flukes rather than demonstrations of hidden capability. "Ready for some real challenges today?" "I'll do my best," Sarah replied, her voice carrying just the right amount of civilian uncertainty, while her eyes cataloged the positions and equipment of every person within tactical range. The morning light revealed details that darkness had hidden: additional security personnel positioned at observation points, electronic surveillance equipment that hadn't been present the previous day, and communication systems that suggested today's activities were being monitored at levels that extended far beyond routine training evaluation. Warren approached the group with his characteristic measured stride, but Sarah noticed micro-expressions that suggested elevated alertness beneath his command bearing. "Today's exercises will focus on advanced tactical scenarios," he announced. "We'll be evaluating performance under stress conditions that simulate real-world operational requirements." The challenges began with complex equipment failures that tested both technical knowledge and problem-solving capabilities under time pressure. Sarah's responses demonstrated familiarity with military systems that went far beyond civilian contractor experience, but she continued to disguise her expertise with apparent hesitation and carefully crafted mistakes that maintained her cover while revealing just enough capability to satisfy the day's requirements. It was during the morning's equipment check that the second major clue emerged. As Sarah adjusted her gear for the day's challenges, a piece of paper fluttered from her equipment bag and landed face up on the concrete. The document was immediately recognizable to military personnel as official correspondence, but the postmark and routing codes told a story that raised significant questions about Sarah's background and current situation. Warren approached the fallen letter with casual interest that masked intense curiosity about its contents and implications. The postmark showed Khost, Afghanistan, with a date that placed it 2 years in the past, precisely the time frame when Operation Archangel had concluded with catastrophic results that had never been fully explained in official reports. The routing codes indicated classification levels that suggested the correspondence was connected to operations that remained compartmentalized above most personnel's clearance levels. "Family correspondence?" Warren asked, offering the letter back to Sarah with movements that appeared routine but actually positioned him to observe her reaction to its recovery. "Something like that," Sarah replied, but her response carried undertones that suggested the document's significance extended far beyond personal communication. Her fingers gripped the letter with protective intensity that indicated emotional rather than practical value, and Warren noticed how her breathing pattern shifted when she made contact with the paper. "Afghanistan can be a difficult place to maintain communication," Warren observed, his tone remaining conversational, while his eyes searched Sarah's expression for additional information about her connection to operations in that region. "So I've heard," Sarah replied, but the careful neutrality of her response suggested she possessed knowledge that went beyond second-hand reports or news media coverage. Warren filed the observation with the growing collection of evidence that Emma Thompson's background contained elements that didn't match her official documentation. The letter represented a direct connection to military operations in Afghanistan during the time frame when highly classified missions had resulted in casualties that were never fully explained to personnel outside the immediate operational chain of command. The morning progressed with challenges that tested coordination between multiple participants, requiring communication protocols and tactical awareness that separated military-trained personnel from civilian contractors. Sarah's performance continued to demonstrate capabilities that exceeded her supposed background, but she maintained her cover with sufficient skill to avoid direct confrontation while providing Warren with additional evidence of her true identity. Something's not adding up with her story, right? Subscribe if you're curious about what she's hiding. We share military stories that reveal the truth behind the surface. Hit the bell so you catch every twist as it unfolds. The day's first major test came in the form of a multi-unit coordination exercise that required participants to manage communication between dispersed teams while maintaining tactical awareness and operational security. The challenge was designed to evaluate leadership capabilities under stress, but it also provided opportunities for participants to demonstrate knowledge and skills that might not otherwise be apparent during routine training activities. Sarah found herself naturally assuming coordination responsibilities as the exercise developed, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from experience in situations where effective communication meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her use of military terminology was unconscious but accurate, and her tactical decisions demonstrated understanding of operational principles that weren't taught in civilian leadership courses. Warren observed the exercise from his command position, noting how Sarah's communication style shifted into patterns that matched classified protocols for special operations coordination. Her situational awareness remained active despite the apparently controlled training environment, and her tactical positioning suggested someone who'd learned to expect threats that even in supposedly secure areas. Interesting command presence for an administrative specialist, Warren commented to Major Vance, who was monitoring the exercise from the observation platform. Her communication protocols are textbook special operations, Vance replied. Either she's had training that isn't reflected in her background documentation, or she's naturally gifted in ways that would have made her an exceptional military officer. Warren nodded, but continued watching Sarah's performance with growing certainty that her civilian contractor cover was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The woman possessed skills that required years of training under conditions that civilian contractors never experienced, and her presence on his range was beginning to feel less like coincidence and more like the implementation of a plan that extended far beyond routine training evaluation. The exercise concluded with results that placed Sarah's team significantly ahead of more experienced participants, an outcome that drew attention from other instructors and raised additional questions about her background and capabilities. But it was the arrival of additional observers that created the morning's most significant tension. Ivers approached the range with several associates whose bearing and equipment suggested intelligence community affiliation at levels that required high-level security clearances. Their presence transformed the training environment from routine instruction to something that felt more like evaluation or interrogation, and Warren found himself caught between competing loyalties and incomplete information about the forces that were converging on his facility. "Impressive performance," Ivers said as he approached Sarah's position, his tone carrying undertones that suggested the compliment was anything but casual. "Very impressive for someone with limited tactical experience." Sarah turned toward Ivers with movements that appeared startled, but actually positioned her for optimal response to potential threats. Her peripheral vision remained active, cataloging the positions and equipment of Ivers' associates while maintaining the appearance of civilian uncertainty about the developing situation. "Thank you," Sarah replied, but her voice carried wariness that suggested she recognized the threat that Ivers represented to her operational security and personal safety. "Tell me," Ivers continued, moving closer with the confidence of someone who believed he held decisive tactical advantages, "what's your opinion of recent operations in the Coast Province?" The question was delivered with casual interest, but Warren recognized it as a probe designed to elicit information that would either confirm or challenge Sarah's civilian cover story. Coast Province had been the site of numerous classified operations during the time frame suggested by the letter that had fallen from Sarah's equipment, and knowledge of those operations was compartmentalized at levels that required special access clearances. "I wouldn't know anything about military operations," Sarah replied, but her response came too quickly and carried undertones that suggested she possessed exactly the knowledge that Ivers was probing for. "Of course not," Ivers agreed with a smile that never reached his eyes. "But hypothetically, if someone had been involved in operations in that region, they might have developed certain skills and knowledge that would be apparent to trained observers." Warren felt the conversation's tension escalate beyond the level of casual questioning, and he found himself preparing to intervene in a situation that was rapidly approaching the point where diplomatic solutions might no longer be adequate. Whatever history existed between Ivers and Sarah was about to surface in ways that could have consequences extending far beyond his training facility. "Hypothetically," Sarah replied, her voice acquiring an edge that suggested the civilian contractor facade was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. "Someone with that kind of experience might also have learned when to recognize threats and how to respond to them appropriately." The exchange had moved beyond verbal sparring into the realm of direct confrontation, and Warren recognized the signs of a situation that was about to escalate beyond his ability to control through normal command channels. Both Ivers and Sarah were operating under agendas that extended far beyond training range politics, and their conflict was about to become his problem in ways that would require careful navigation to avoid consequences that could affect national security considerations. "Gentlemen," Warren interjected, his command voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 35 years managing situations where competing interests threatened to compromise mission objectives. "Perhaps we should focus on today's training objectives rather than hypothetical scenarios." But Ivers's smile suggested that the confrontation was proceeding according to his plan, and Warren realized that whatever was about to happen had been orchestrated to occur on his range for reasons that he didn't fully understand, but suspected he wouldn't appreciate once they became clear. The morning session continued with additional challenges that tested marksmanship under increasingly complex conditions. But the atmosphere had shifted in ways that went beyond normal training stress. Sarah's performance remained consistently excellent, despite the psychological pressure that Ivers was applying through his presence and periodic comments designed to probe her background and test her operational security. It was during the afternoon precision shooting challenge that the situation reached its first major crisis point. Sarah was engaging targets at extended range when her rifle experienced a catastrophic malfunction that could have resulted in serious injury if not handled with expert precision. The weapon's action locked in a configuration that created dangerous pressure differentials, requiring immediate intervention by someone with advanced knowledge of firearm safety and emergency procedures. Sarah's response was immediate and professional, implementing safety protocols with the kind of automatic competence that came from experience in situations where equipment failures could mean the difference between life and death. Her actions prevented injury to herself and other personnel, but they also demonstrated knowledge and reflexes that no civilian contractor should have possessed. "Interesting emergency response," Warren observed, noting how Sarah had handled the malfunction with textbook precision despite the apparent stress of the situation. "Where did you learn those particular safety procedures?" "Common sense," Sarah replied, but the explanation was obviously inadequate for the level of expertise she'd demonstrated. Warren approached the malfunction rifle with appropriate caution, but it was Sarah who provided the technical analysis that identified the specific cause of the failure and the procedures required to safely clear the weapon. Her explanation demonstrated familiarity with advanced firearms engineering that went far beyond anything a civilian contractor would have encountered in normal circumstances. "Thompson," Warren said quietly, his tone carrying the kind of authority that came from 3 decades of command experience, "I think it's time we had a more detailed conversation about your background and qualifications." But before Sarah could respond, Ivers approached with his associates, their timing suggesting that the equipment malfunction might not have been the accident it appeared to be. "Actually," Ivers said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose plan is proceeding as intended, "I think it's time we discussed Miss Thompson's real identity and the reasons for her presence on this training facility." Warren felt the situation shift into territory that required immediate command decisions about competing loyalties and unclear objectives. Whatever was about to be revealed would either resolve the questions that had been building since Sarah's arrival or create new complications that would require resources and authorities that extended far beyond his normal command responsibilities. The deployment insurance papers beside her fake credentials, coverage every operator maximizes before high-risk missions, triple death benefits for families, disability protection for combat injuries, 89% of special forces increase coverage before dangerous assignments. Protecting the future matters as much as surviving today. Ivers produced a tablet computer that displayed information requiring security clearances that Warren didn't possess, but the implications were clear from the expressions on the faces of the intelligence personnel who were reviewing the data. Sarah's civilian contractor documentation was about to be challenged by evidence that suggested she possessed identity and background that had been classified at levels requiring special access authorizations. "Emma Thompson," Ivers announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was about to expose secrets that people had died to protect, "doesn't exist. The Social Security number belongs to someone who died in childhood. The employment history references companies that were dissolved years ago. The security clearance was issued based on documentation that was fabricated by professionals who understand how to create identities that will survive routine background checks." Warren absorbed this information while maintaining his command bearing, but internally he was processing the implications of hosting someone whose presence represented either a significant security breach or the implementation of an operation that had been compartmentalized above his clearance level. The real question, Ivers continued, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face, is who Emma Thompson really is and why she's chosen to surface at this particular time and location. Sarah remained silent, but Warren noticed how her posture had shifted into something that suggested she was preparing for conflict rather than continuing to maintain her civilian cover. Her tactical awareness had escalated to levels that indicated she was conducting threat assessment and response planning with the systematic approach of someone who had survived situations where such preparation meant the difference between success and failure. Perhaps, Warren suggested, his command voice carrying the authority of someone who wasn't about to allow his training facility to become the site of an intelligence community confrontation without proper authorization and oversight. This conversation should continue in a more appropriate setting with proper security protocols. But Ivers shook his head with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the tactical advantages. I think the current setting is perfect for the kind of demonstration I have in mind. Warren realized that whatever was about to happen had been planned to occur in public view with maximum visibility and minimum opportunity for the kind of damage control that intelligence operations usually required. Ivers was preparing to expose Sarah's identity in a way that would create consequences extending far beyond the immediate situation, and Warren found himself in the position of trying to maintain control over forces that he didn't fully understand. "Very well," Ivers announced, turning toward the assembled personnel who were watching the confrontation with growing awareness that routine training had become something significantly more complex. "Let me introduce you to the person you've been calling Emma Thompson." The moment hung in the air like smoke from a distant explosion, carrying implications that would reshape everyone's understanding of the previous day's events and the current situation's true significance. Sarah stood perfectly still, but Warren could see her mentally calculating tactical options with the systematic approach of someone who'd learned to expect betrayal and prepare for the worst possible outcomes. Her real name, Ivers continued, savoring the moment with the satisfaction of someone whose plan was proceeding exactly as intended, is Sarah Matthews, former Sergeant Major, United States Army Special Operations, call sign, Ghost Wind. The revelation hit the assembled personnel like a physical force, transforming their understanding of everything they had witnessed since Sarah's arrival. The nervous civilian contractor, who'd struggled with basic marksmanship, was revealed as one of the military's most elite operators, someone whose capabilities had been legendary, even within the special operations community. 127 confirmed kills, Ivers continued, reading from his tablet with the precision of someone delivering an indictment. 15 presidential commendations that will never be made public, operations in 7 countries that officially never happened, and most importantly, reported killed in action 2 years ago during Operation Archangel in Afghanistan's Khost province. Warren felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with the kind of clarity that came when incomplete information suddenly revealed its true pattern. Sarah's capabilities, her knowledge, her reflexes, her tactical awareness, everything made sense when viewed through the lens of special operations background, rather than civilian contractor cover story. But the revelation also raised new questions about her presence on his range, and the reasons why someone who had been declared dead had chosen to surface in a situation that would inevitably lead to exposure. Either Sarah had been forced into the open by circumstances beyond her control, or her appearance was part of a larger operation that Warren didn't understand but suspected he was about to become deeply involved in. "The question," Ivers said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who believed he'd achieved decisive tactical advantage, "is what Ghost Wind is doing here, and whether her presence represents a threat to national security that requires immediate containment." Sarah finally spoke, her voice carrying none of the uncertainty that had characterized her civilian persona. "The only threat to national security in this situation is standing right behind you, Ivers." The words were delivered with quiet authority that suggested Sarah was done with pretense and ready to engage in whatever confrontation Ivers had been building toward. Warren recognized the shift in her demeanor as the emergence of someone who'd spent years operating in environments where survival required the ability to transition from concealment to combat readiness without hesitation. "Interesting accusation," Ivers replied, but Warren noticed how his associates had shifted into positions that suggested they were prepared for the situation to escalate beyond verbal confrontation, particularly coming from someone who's been operating under false identity for the past 2 years. "My identity hasn't been false," Sarah replied, her tactical awareness now operating at levels that made no attempt to conceal her military training. It's been classified. There's a difference, though I wouldn't expect someone like you to understand the distinction. Warren realized that the confrontation had moved beyond intelligence community politics into the realm of personal vendettas that could have consequences extending far beyond the immediate participants. Whatever history existed between Sarah and Ivers was about to surface in ways that would require careful management to prevent collateral damage to personnel and operations that weren't directly involved in their conflict. "Dr. Ivers," Warren interjected, his command voice carrying the authority of someone who wasn't about to allow his facility to become the site of an uncontrolled confrontation. "I think it's time you explained exactly what authority you're operating under and what objectives you're trying to achieve." But Ivers's response was to produce documentation that Warren recognized as presidential authorization for intelligence operations that superseded normal military command authority. The papers were genuine, but Warren suspected they didn't authorize the kind of public confrontation that Ivers was orchestrating. "My authority," Ivers announced, "extends to the identification and containment of threats to national security, including personnel who've been operating outside official oversight for extended periods." Sarah's response was a laugh that carried no humor whatsoever. "Outside official oversight? Ivers, you sold out Operation Archangel to hostile forces. 6 operators died because you provided our movement schedules and tactical plans to people who used that information to set up an ambush that killed everyone except me." The accusation hung in the air like a live grenade, and Warren realized that the confrontation had moved into territory where the truth would either vindicate Sarah's actions or expose her as a security threat that required immediate neutralization. Either way, the situation was about to escalate beyond his ability to control through normal command channels. "Prove it," Ivers replied, but his voice carried undertones that suggested he was less confident than his words indicated. Sarah reached into her equipment bag and produced a device that Warren recognized as a secure communication recorder, the kind of equipment used to document conversations that might later require verification in intelligence community proceedings. 2 years of surveillance, Ivers. 2 years of documenting your contacts, your communications, your financial transactions. Everything you've done since Coast is recorded on servers that will automatically release the information if anything happens to me. Warren watched the tactical situation shift as Ivers realized that his plan to expose and neutralize Sarah had been anticipated and countered by someone with superior operational planning and resources. The confrontation was no longer between a rogue operator and official authority, but between competing intelligence operations that had been building toward this moment for 2 years. "You're bluffing," Ivers said, but his associates were exchanging glances that suggested they were beginning to question the wisdom of their current position. Sarah's response was to activate the communication device, which immediately began transmitting data to locations that were compartmentalized beyond anyone's immediate ability to intercept or control. Coast operation files, communication intercepts, financial records, and video evidence of your meetings with hostile intelligence services, all streaming to servers in 7 countries with automatic release protocols if the transmission is interrupted. Warren realized that he was witnessing the culmination of a 2-year intelligence operation that had been planned and executed by someone with resources and capabilities that extended far beyond individual initiative. Sarah hadn't been hiding from her past. She'd been building a case that would expose the betrayal that had cost 6 operators their lives and compromised operations that were still classified above his clearance level. "Admiral Warren," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who was about to request official support for actions that had been compartmentalized for operational security reasons, "I respectfully request that you place Dr. Ivers under arrest pending investigation for treason, murder, and providing aid and comfort to hostile foreign intelligence services." The request hit Warren like a physical force, requiring him to make command decisions about competing claims of authority and unclear evidence in a situation that would have consequences extending far beyond his training facility. But his 35 years of military experience had taught him to recognize the difference between legitimate authority and manipulative deception, and everything about Sarah's presentation suggested operational competence rather than rogue activity. "Dr. Ivers," Warren said, his command voice carrying the authority of someone who'd made his decision about which claims deserve support, You and your associates will remain here while I contact appropriate authorities to sort out these competing allegations." But Ivers's response was to signal his associates, who began moving in ways that suggested they were prepared to use force to achieve objectives that hadn't been accomplished through official channels. Warren recognized the tactical situation as one that was about to escalate beyond verbal confrontation into the kind of armed conflict that could result in casualties among personnel who weren't directly involved in the intelligence community dispute. Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. She moved with the fluid competence of someone who'd spent years training for situations where survival required transitioning from defensive posture to combat readiness without hesitation. Her actions demonstrated capabilities that transformed her from apparent victim to tactical threat in the space of heartbeats, and Warren realized that Ghost Wind was about to demonstrate why her reputation had been legendary even within the special operations community. Did that just change everything you thought you knew? Subscribe now because the biggest revelation is still coming. Our channel uncovers the hidden stories of real military heroes. Bell notification ensures you're here for the complete truth. The confrontation escalated into the kind of tactical engagement that Warren had witnessed in combat zones but never expected to see on a Virginia training range. Sarah moved with precision that demonstrated years of training in close-quarters combat, neutralizing threats while minimizing collateral damage to personnel and equipment that weren't directly involved in the conflict. Ivers's associates had been prepared for resistance, but they hadn't anticipated facing someone with Sarah's level of tactical competence and situational awareness. Their attempt to use force to achieve their objectives resulted in a demonstration of special operations capabilities that left no doubt about Sarah's identity or the accuracy of her claims about her background and training. Warren found himself in the position of providing command oversight for a situation that was rapidly resolving itself through means that would require careful documentation and extensive reporting to authorities that operated above his normal chain of command. But the immediate tactical situation was clear. Sarah had demonstrated superior preparation and capability, while Ivers's actions had revealed objectives that weren't consistent with legitimate intelligence community operations. The engagement concluded with Ivers and his associates restrained and disarmed, their equipment secured as evidence for investigations that would extend far beyond the immediate situation. Sarah had achieved tactical control without causing casualties, but Warren realized that the situation's resolution would require resources and authorities that extended far beyond his normal command responsibilities. "Admiral," Sarah said, her breathing controlled despite the physical exertion of the tactical engagement, "I apologize for bringing this situation to your facility." But Ivers forced the confrontation by threatening to expose operations that are still classified above most personnel's clearance levels. Warren nodded, recognizing that Sarah's actions had been defensive rather than aggressive, and that her presence on his range had been part of an operation designed to expose genuine threats to national security rather than create them. "What happens now?" he asked. "Seedard." "Now," Sarah replied, "the evidence gets reviewed by people with appropriate clearances, and justice gets served for 6 operators who died because someone sold them out for money." Warren looked around the range that had been transformed from training facility to tactical engagement site, noting how his personnel had responded to the crisis with professional competence despite being caught in the middle of an intelligence community operation that none of them had expected to encounter. The situation would require extensive debriefing and documentation, but the immediate threat had been neutralized by someone whose capabilities exceeded anything in her official documentation. "Sergeant Major Matthews," Warren said, using Sarah's real rank and name for the first time, "I believe we owe you an apology for the disrespect you've endured while building your case against genuine threats to national security." Sarah's response was a smile that carried warmth for the first time since her arrival at the range. "No apology necessary, sir. Sometimes the mission requires taking some hits while gathering the evidence needed to achieve objectives." Warren realized that he was looking at someone who embodied the best qualities of military service: dedication to mission accomplishment, willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for greater good, and the kind of professional competence that separated elite operators from ordinary personnel. Sarah had spent 2 years building a case that would protect future operations and honor fallen comrades, accepting mockery and disrespect as the price of maintaining operational security until the mission could be completed. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when additional vehicles arrived carrying personnel with sufficient authority and clearance to handle the situation's official resolution. Sarah's evidence was transferred to appropriate channels. Ivers and his associates were taken into custody for processing and investigation, and Warren found himself filing reports that would probably remain classified for decades. But the immediate situation required recognition of Sarah's service and acknowledgement of the sacrifices she'd made to protect operations and personnel that most people would never hear about. Warren assembled his training staff and the personnel who'd witnessed the day's events for an announcement that would provide appropriate context for what they'd experienced. "Ladies and gentlemen," Warren began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 35 years recognizing and honoring exceptional service, "today, you witnessed something that will probably never appear in official records. You saw someone who sacrificed personal comfort and professional reputation to build a case against genuine threats to national security." The assembled personnel listened with the attention that came from recognizing that they'd been participants in events that extended far beyond routine training activities. Their understanding of the previous day's events was being reshaped by information that revealed the true significance of what they'd witnessed and experienced. "Sergeant Major Sarah Matthews," Warren continued, "served with distinction in operations that remain classified above most of our clearance levels. She was reported killed in action, not because she died, but because her mission required her to operate under deep cover for an extended period while building evidence against personnel who'd betrayed her unit and caused the deaths of 6 operators." Warren paused, allowing the information to settle before continuing with the kind of recognition that elite operators deserved but rarely received in public settings. The mockery and disrespect she endured here was part of maintaining operational security while completing a mission that required personal sacrifice and professional dedication of the highest order. The response was immediate and unanimous. 200 personnel snapped to attention with the precision that comes from recognizing genuine heroism and exceptional service. Phones were lowered, conversations stopped, and the range fell silent except for the sound of boots coming together in perfect unison. Warren stepped forward and rendered the kind of salute that was reserved for personnel who had demonstrated valor and dedication beyond the normal call of duty. "Sergeant Major Matthews, on behalf of everyone who serves, thank you for completing a mission that honored fallen comrades and protected future operations." Sarah's response was to return the salute with precision that demonstrated years of military training and genuine appreciation for recognition that acknowledged her service and sacrifice. But her expression also carried the satisfaction of someone who'd completed a difficult mission and achieved objectives that would make a difference in ways that most people would never understand. The recognition spread like ripples across the range as personnel realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A dead woman returning to claim justice for betrayed comrades and expose threats that could have compromised future operations. Officers saluted, NCOs came to attention, and enlisted personnel demonstrated the kind of respect that was reserved for legends who'd proven their dedication through actions rather than words. Sarah reviewed the transition certification program, military to civilian pathway, 18 months from combat specialist to federal law enforcement. 87% placement rate with starting salaries exceeding $85,000. This professional certification transforms warriors into high-paid security professionals. Warren approached Sarah as the formal recognition concluded, his expression carrying the kind of respect that came from 35 years of evaluating military professionals and recognizing exceptional capabilities when he encountered them. "What happens now, Sergeant Major? Do you return to active duty, or have you completed your service?" Sarah considered the question with the thoughtfulness of someone who had spent 2 years planning for this moment and considering the options that would become available once her mission was completed. "My active service ended at Coast, Admiral. What I've been doing since then was personal, making sure the people responsible for 6 deaths faced appropriate consequences. And now that's accomplished. Now," Sarah replied, "I have to decide whether Ghost Wind stays buried or whether Sarah Matthews finds a way to contribute to national security in ways that don't require operating in the shadows." Warren nodded, recognizing the choice that many elite operators faced when their classified service ended, and they had to decide how to transition their capabilities to environments that operated under different rules and constraints. Sarah possessed skills that would be valuable in numerous contexts, but she also carried experiences that would require careful integration into civilian life or alternative service opportunities. If you decide you want to continue serving, Warren said, there are positions in training and development that would benefit from your experience and capabilities. Not everyone who can do the mission can also teach others how to do it successfully. Sarah smiled with genuine warmth, recognizing the offer as both professional opportunity and personal validation of her contributions to military service. I'll consider it, sir, but first, I think I need some time to process the fact that I'm no longer dead. The comment drew laughter from nearby personnel who were still processing the revelation that the nervous civilian contractor they'd been mocking was actually one of the military's most elite operators. But the laughter carried respect rather than mockery, and Sarah found herself surrounded by people who wanted to express appreciation for service that had required exceptional sacrifice and dedication. Feeling that justice? Subscribe for more stories where the underestimated prove everyone wrong. We bring you verified military moments that restore your faith in true honor. Hit the bell. These stories matter. As the day moved toward its conclusion, Warren found himself reflecting on the events that had transformed his training range from routine instruction facility to the site of an intelligence operation that had been 2 years in the making. Sarah's presence had brought resolution to a situation that could have compromised future operations and threatened the lives of personnel who were still serving in classified capacities. But the day's events had also demonstrated something important about the nature of service and the dedication required to complete missions that extended beyond personal comfort and conventional recognition. Sarah had endured mockery, maintained cover, and built evidence while operating under conditions that would have broken someone with less dedication and professional competence. "Admiral," Sarah said as she prepared to leave the range for what might be the final time, "thank you for providing the venue for completing this mission, and thank you for recognizing that sometimes justice requires patience and sacrifice before it can be achieved." Warren accepted her thanks with the humility of someone who'd learned that command meant supporting subordinates even when he didn't fully understand the nature of their missions or the challenges they faced in completing them. "Thank you, Sergeant Major, for demonstrating that honor and dedication don't disappear just because service becomes complicated or dangerous." Sarah gathered her equipment with movements that no longer needed to conceal her military training or tactical competence. Her cover was no longer necessary, her mission was complete, and her identity was restored to someone who had earned respect through actions rather than documentation. But Warren noticed that her tactical awareness remained active, old habits from operations where vigilance meant survival, patterns that would probably never completely disappear. "Will we see you again?" asked Private Martinez, one of the younger personnel who'd witnessed the day's events, with the kind of awe that came from recognizing genuine heroism in action. Sarah paused, considering the question with the thoughtfulness of someone who was still processing the transition from classified operation back to acknowledged existence. "Maybe," she replied, "but if you do, I'll probably be using my real name and wearing clothes that fit properly." The comment drew more laughter, but it also highlighted the personal cost of the mission that Sarah had completed. 2 years of living under false identity, enduring disrespect, and maintaining cover while building evidence against people who'd betrayed her unit and caused the deaths of her teammates. The mission was complete, but the transition back to normal life would require its own form of courage and dedication. As Sarah walked toward the parking area, Warren noticed that her movement patterns had shifted from the tactical withdrawal of someone maintaining operational security to the confident stride of someone who'd completed a difficult mission and achieved important objectives. She was no longer Ghost Wind operating in the shadows, or Emma Thompson struggling with civilian limitations. She was Sergeant Major Sarah Matthews, someone who had demonstrated that dedication and competence could overcome betrayal and achieve justice even when the mission required years of patient preparation. The sun touched the horizon as Warren completed his official documentation of the day's events, knowing that most of the details would remain classified, but that the outcome would contribute to protecting future operations and honoring the memory of personnel who died in service to their country. Sarah's mission had been personal, but its completion served larger purposes that extended far beyond individual recognition or revenge. Warren looked across the range where Sarah had demonstrated capabilities that challenged assumptions and revealed truths that some people had tried to keep buried. The target still showed the precision of her shooting, the equipment still bore evidence of her technical competence, and the tactical site still held traces of the engagement that had resolved a 2-year intelligence operation through superior preparation and professional execution. In the distance, Warren could see the lights of vehicles carrying personnel and evidence toward facilities where appropriate authorities would review Sarah's documentation and ensure that justice was served for betrayals that had cost 6 operators their lives. The immediate situation was resolved, but Warren suspected that the impact would continue for years as the intelligence community processed the implications of Sarah's evidence and took steps to prevent similar betrayals in the future. The Virginia night settled over Quantico with the kind of stillness that followed significant events, and Warren found himself grateful that his training range had been chosen as the venue for an operation that demonstrated the best qualities of military service: dedication to mission, loyalty to teammates, and willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for larger purposes that served national security and honored fallen comrades. Warren locked the range facilities and began the drive back to his quarters, but his mind remained focused on the lessons that the day's events had provided about the nature of service and the dedication required to complete missions that extended beyond conventional recognition. Sarah had demonstrated that true warriors didn't disappear when their official service ended. They found ways to continue contributing to purposes larger than themselves, even when that contribution required operating in shadows and accepting misunderstanding as the price of achieving important objectives. The story would spread, of course, though probably not in official channels or public media. Within the military community, the tale of Ghostwind's return would become part of the informal legend that connected elite operators across services and generations. But for those who'd witnessed the events directly, the memory would serve as a reminder that strength often appeared in unexpected forms, that justice sometimes required patience and sacrifice, and that the most dangerous person in any room might be the one nobody noticed until they chose to reveal themselves. As Warren reached his quarters, he took one final look back toward the range, where Sarah had completed a mission that began with betrayal in Afghanistan and ended with justice in Virginia. The lights of the facility created patterns against the darkness that reminded him of other places and other operations where he'd witnessed the kind of dedication and competence that separated elite warriors from ordinary personnel. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new personnel to train, but Warren knew that he'd never again underestimate someone based on appearances or documentation alone. Sarah had taught him, and everyone else who'd witnessed her performance, that true capability often operated beneath surfaces that were designed to conceal rather than reveal, and that the most important missions were sometimes those that never appeared in official records, but made all the difference in protecting people who would never know how close they'd come to danger. The night was quiet now, but Warren carried with him the memory of 200 personnel standing at attention to honor someone who'd sacrificed everything to complete a mission that served purposes larger than personal recognition or reward. In a world where heroism often went unrecognized and service was frequently misunderstood, Sarah had demonstrated that dedication and honor remained alive in people who chose to serve, even when that service required operating in shadows and accepting misunderstanding as the price of achieving objectives that mattered more than personal comfort or conventional success. The story was complete, but its impact would continue as long as people remembered that sometimes the most important battles were fought by individuals who chose to honor fallen comrades and protect future operations, even when that choice required years of patient sacrifice and professional dedication that would never receive public recognition or official acknowledgement. Sarah had proven that warriors never truly die. They simply choose when and how to reveal themselves in service of purposes that transcend individual recognition and serve larger truths about honor, dedication, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for teammates and mission success. Silent service speaks loudest when honor is tested. The words echoed across the Virginia landscape as Warren stood on his quarters balcony, watching the last traces of sunset fade into darkness. Below him, the lights of Quantico spread like scattered stars, each one representing personnel who would carry the memory of Sarah's revelation for the rest of their careers. In 12 hours, the story would begin spreading through unofficial channels that connected military installations across 7 continents, becoming part of the oral tradition that preserved lessons about honor, sacrifice, and the dangerous assumption that appearances revealed truth. Warren's secure phone buzzed with incoming calls from commanders who had received preliminary reports about the day's events. Each conversation would require careful navigation between operational security requirements and the need to ensure that appropriate lessons were learned from Sarah's demonstration of what dedication looked like when stripped of recognition and official support. The intelligence community would spend months processing the implications of her evidence, but the immediate impact was already rippling outward through networks that operated on trust and shared understanding rather than formal communication channels. 3 time zones away, Master Sergeant Patricia Wong was briefing her special operations team about assumptions and hidden capability when her encrypted communication device displayed a message that made her pause mid-sentence. The text was brief. Ghost Wind confirmed active. Original assessment validated. Recommend immediate review of dismissal protocols. Wong had been Sarah's training partner 8 years earlier, before classified operations separated their paths and official records declared one of them dead. Now she was staring at confirmation that legends sometimes returned from graves that had been premature, and that the military's most dangerous operators were often those who had learned to become invisible in plain sight. Wong's team noticed her reaction to the message, and several recognized the subtle shift in their instructor's demeanor that suggested significant information had just been received. "Change of plans," Wong announced, her voice carrying new intensity. "We're going to discuss threat assessment and the dangers of underestimating personnel based on surface appearances, because apparently some lessons are still being learned the hard way." Back at Quantico, Warren received a call from General Morrison, whose voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent the evening reviewing classified files that painted an increasingly complex picture of operations that had been compartmentalized above most personnel's clearance levels. "Warren," Morrison said without preamble, "I need to know everything about what happened on your range today. Every detail, every observation, every interaction that seemed routine, but might have been something else." Warren spent 40 minutes providing a comprehensive debrief that covered not only the day's dramatic revelation, but also the subtle indicators that had accumulated since Sarah's arrival. Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally requesting clarification about technical details or tactical observations that would help intelligence analysts piece together the full scope of Sarah's operation. "The evidence she collected," Morrison said when Warren finished his report, "represents 2 years of methodical intelligence gathering that exposed a network of compromised personnel extending far beyond the immediate situation. Ivers wasn't operating alone, and his betrayal of Operation Archangel was part of a larger pattern that threatened ongoing operations in 7 countries. Warren absorbed this information while processing its implications for the personnel under his command and the training programs that would need to incorporate lessons learned from Sarah's demonstration of advanced operational capabilities. What happens to the people who witnessed today's events? They get debriefed, sworn to appropriate levels of secrecy, and reminded that some stories serve national security better when they remain within military circles rather than becoming public entertainment, Morrison replied. But they also get the benefit of learning that elite operators come in forms that don't match Hollywood expectations, and that the most dangerous threats are often those that appear harmless until they choose to reveal themselves. The conversation concluded with assignments that would keep Warren busy for weeks, documenting lessons learned, and implementing training modifications that would help future personnel recognize capability when it appeared in unexpected forms. But the immediate challenge was managing the impact on his staff and trainees, who were still processing the revelation that they'd been participants in an intelligence operation rather than routine training activities. Sarah, meanwhile, was driving north on Interstate 95, her destination a safe house in Baltimore, where intelligence community personnel would conduct extensive debriefing sessions that would help them understand the full scope of the networks she'd identified and the threats she'd neutralized through 2 years of patient investigation. Her mission was complete, but the transition back to acknowledged existence would require its own form of courage and professional adaptation. The drive gave her time to process the day's events and consider the choices that would determine her future. For 2 years, she'd lived with the singular focus of building evidence against the people responsible for her teammates' deaths. Now that objective was achieved, but the skills and experience that had made the mission possible weren't things that simply disappeared when official purposes no longer required them. Her secure phone displayed messages from colleagues who had received word that Ghost Wind was no longer listed among the presumed dead. Some offered support for whatever came next. Others requested assistance with operations that could benefit from her unique combination of capabilities and operational security experience. all carried the underlying recognition that Sarah represented resources that were too valuable to waste on conventional retirement or civilian employment that wouldn't utilize her full potential. At 10:47 p.m., Sarah pulled into the Baltimore Safe House parking area and was met by Agent Rebecca Torres, whose bearing and equipment suggested intelligence community affiliation at levels that required high security clearances. Torres had been briefed on Sarah's background and the significance of her operation, but seeing Ghostwind in person created the kind of impact that written reports couldn't convey. "Sergeant Major Matthews," Torres said, her voice carrying respect that came from understanding what Sarah had accomplished during 2 years of operating without official support or recognition. "Welcome back to the acknowledged world. We have a lot to discuss about your evidence and its implications for ongoing operations." Sarah accepted the greeting with the controlled friendliness of someone who'd learned to evaluate new contacts through operational security filters that would probably never completely relax. "Agent Torres, I assume you've had time to review the preliminary evidence packages? Enough to understand that you've identified threats that extend far beyond the immediate situation," Torres replied, "and enough to realize that your investigation represents the kind of methodical intelligence work that usually requires teams and resources that you apparently didn't have access to." The debriefing sessions would continue for days, but the initial conversations confirmed that Sarah's evidence was comprehensive enough to support prosecutions and operational changes that would protect future missions and honor the memory of personnel who had died because of betrayals that should have been prevented. Her patient work had created the foundation for justice that would extend far beyond personal satisfaction or revenge. Meanwhile, back at Quantico, Warren's personnel were experiencing the kind of revelation that changed how they evaluated people and situations for the rest of their careers. Private Martinez, who'd witnessed Sarah's transformation from struggling civilian to elite operator, would spend the next decade watching for signs of hidden capability in personnel who didn't match conventional expectations. Corporal Hussein, who'd laughed at Sarah's apparent nervousness, developed evaluation skills that helped him identify undercover intelligence personnel during deployment operations that required operational security and threat assessment. Rodriguez, whose mockery had been the most persistent and public, requested a private meeting with Warren to discuss the lessons learned and the changes he needed to make in his approach to training and personnel evaluation. "Sir," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the humility of someone who'd realized that his assumptions had been completely wrong, "I need to understand how I missed so many indicators that Matthews, was operating at levels far beyond anything I recognized." Warren spent an hour walking Rodriguez through the subtle signs that had accumulated since Sarah's arrival, helping him understand that elite operators were trained to appear ordinary when operational security required concealment rather than demonstration. "The lesson," Warren concluded, "isn't that you failed to recognize her capabilities. The lesson is that our most dangerous enemies and our most valuable allies often look exactly like the people we dismiss as unremarkable." The conversation became part of Rodriguez's development as an instructor, teaching him to look beyond surface appearances and recognize that true capability often operated beneath facades designed to conceal rather than reveal. His future training methods would incorporate these lessons, helping thousands of personnel develop the evaluation skills that could make the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. 6 months later, Sarah's evidence had resulted in prosecutions that dismantled intelligence networks operating in 12 countries, preventing compromises that could have cost hundreds of lives and billions of dollars in operational resources. Her patient investigation had identified patterns of betrayal that extended far beyond Operation Archangel, exposing systematic corruption that threatened ongoing missions and personnel who were still serving in classified capacities. But perhaps the most significant impact was on military culture itself, as the story of Ghostwind's return became part of the informal education that connected elite operators across services and generations. The tale served as a reminder that strength often appeared in unexpected forms, that justice sometimes required years of patient preparation, and that the most important battles were frequently fought by individuals who chose honor over personal comfort and mission accomplishment over public recognition. Sarah, now operating under her real name and identity, had accepted a position training special operations personnel in advanced operational security and threat assessment. Her experience operating under deep cover while building intelligence cases provided unique insights that couldn't be learned from textbooks or conventional instruction. Her students learned not only technical skills, but also the psychological resilience required to maintain mission focus when success required accepting, misunderstanding, and mockery as the price of achieving objectives that served larger purposes. The range at Quantico became an unofficial monument to the idea that assumptions about capability could be dangerous, whether applied to allies or enemies. Personnel who trained there learned Sarah's story as part of their professional education, understanding that the most significant threats often appeared harmless until they chose to reveal themselves, and that the most valuable teammates were sometimes those who operated without recognition or official acknowledgement. Warren, now promoted to positions that required him to train commanders rather than individual operators, used Sarah's demonstration as a case study in leadership challenges and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances when evaluating personnel and threats. His students learned that command meant supporting subordinates even when their missions were compartmentalized beyond immediate understanding, and that the most important operations were often those that never appeared in official records, but made all the difference in protecting people who would never know how close they'd come to danger. The story continued to evolve as it spread through military networks, but its core message remained constant. Silent service speaks loudest when honor is tested, and the most dangerous warriors are often those who've learned to become invisible until circumstances require them to reveal capabilities that can change the outcome of conflicts that determine the fate of nations.
Behind every uniform is a person trying their best, seeing each other with respect. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to TNG Story.